Page number 160 continued. Thomas Chatterton, 1752 to 1770. This marvelous boy, to whom Keats dedicated his Endymion, 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 and who is celebrated in Shelley's Adonai, Adnonai, is one of the saddest and most interesting figures of the Romantic Revival. During his childhood, he haunted the old church of St. Mary's, Redcliffe, in Bristol, where he was fascinated by the medieval air of the place and especially by one old chest, known as Cain's Coffer, containing musty documents which had been preserved for 300 years. With strange, uncanny intentness, the child pored over these relics of the past, copying them instead of his writing book, until he could imitate not only the spelling and language but even the handwriting of the original. Soon after the Ossian forgeries appeared, Chatterton began to produce documents apparently very old, containing medieval poems, legends, and family histories centering around two characters, Thomas Rowley, priest and poet, and William Canynge, Canynge, merchant of Bristol in the days of Henry VI. It seems incredible that the whole design of these medieval romances should have been worked out by a child of 11, but that he could reproduce the style and the writing of Caxton's day so well that the printers were deceived. But such is the fact. More and more Rowley papers, as they were called, were produced by Chatterton, apparently from the archives of the old church, in reality from his own imagination, delighting a large circle of readers and deceiving all but grey and a few scholars who recognized the occasional misuse of 15th century English words. All his work was carefully finished and bore the unmistakable stamp of literary genius. Reading now his Ella, or the Ballad of Charity, or the long poem in ballad style called Bristow Tragedy, Bristowe, Tragedy, Tragedie. It is hard to realize that it is a boy's work. At 17 years of age, Chatterton went for a library career in London, where he soon afterwards took poison and killed himself in a fit of childish despondency brought on by poverty and hunger. Thomas Percy, 1729 to 1811. To Percy, Bishop of the Irish Church in Dromore, we are indebted for the first attempt at a systematic collection of the folk songs and the ballads which are counted among the treasures of a nation's literature. In 1765, he published in 3 volumes his famous Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, Reliques, Reliques, Reliques of Ancient English Poetry. The most valuable part of this work is the remarkable collection of Old English and Scottish ballads such as Chevy Chase, The Nut Brown Maid, Children of the Wood, Battle of Otterburn, and many, many more, which but for his labor might easily have perished. We have now we have now much better and more reliable editions of these ballads, for Percy garbled his materials, adding and subtracting freely, and even inventing a few ballads of his own. Two motives probably influenced him in this. First, the different versions of the same ballad varied greatly, and Percy, in changing them to suit himself, took the same liberty as had many other writers in dealing with the same material. Second, Percy was under the influence of Johnson and his school, and thought it necessary to add a few elegant ballads to atone for the rudeness of the more obsolete poems. That sounds queer now, used as we are in the exactness in the dealings with historical and literary materials, but it expresses the general point of the age in which he lived. The 18th century was a great period for English prose, though not for English poetry. Matthew Arnold called it an age of prose and reason, implying thereby that that no good poetry was written in this century, and that prose dominated the literary realm. Much of the poetry of the age is prosaic, if not altogether prose-rhymed prose. Verse was used by many poets of the age for purposes which could be realized or realized better through prose. Our view is that the 18th century was not altogether barren of real poetry. Even then, it is better known for the galaxy of brilliant prose writers that threw it up. End of page 160, now page 161. In this century, there was a remarkable proliferation of practical interests which could best be expressed in a new kind of prose pliant, and that of a workaday kind capable of rising to every occasion. This prose was simple and modern, having nothing of the Baroque, B-A-R-O-Q-U-E, Baroque or Ciceronian color of the prose of the 17th writers like Milton and Sir Thomas Browne. Practicality and reason ruled supreme in prose and determined its style. It is really strange that in this period the language of prose was becoming simpler and more easily comprehensible, but on the other hand the language of poetry was being conventionalized into the artificial poetic diction which at the end of the century was so severely condemned by Wordsworth as gaudy and inane phraseology. The contribution of the age to prose. Much of 18th century prose is taken up by topical journalistic issues, as indeed is the prose of any other age. However, in the 18th century we come across for the first time in the history of English literature a really huge mass of pamphlets, journals, booklets and magazines. The whole activity of life of the 18th century is embodied in the works of literary critics, economists, letter writers, essayists, politicians, public speakers, divines, philosophers, historians, scientists, biographers, and public projectors. Moreover, a thing of particular importance is the introduction of the two new prose genres in this century. The novel and the periodical paper are the two gifts of the century to English literature, and some of the best prose of the age is to be found in its novels and periodical essays. Summing up the importance of the century are these words of a critic: the 18th century itself had created the novel and practically created the literary history. It had put the essay into general circulation. It had hit off various forms, an abundant supply of lighter verse. It had added largely to philosophy and literature. Above all, it had shaped the form of English prose of all work, the one thing that remained to be done at the opening. When an age has done so much, it seems somewhat liberal to approach it not doing more. Even Matthew Arnold had to call the 18th century our excellent and indispensable 18th century. Daniel Defoe, 1660 to 1731. Defoe was perhaps the most copious writer of the 18th century. He is best known for his Robinson Crusoe and some other works of fiction like Moll Flanders and Roxana. His non-fictive prose consists of a large number of pamphlets, generally published anonymously, and a staggering bulk of miscellaneous writings, mostly topical in nature. He started a tri-weekly periodical, The Review, in 1704, which continued up to 1713. In it, he dealt with political, religious, and commercial matters. There is not much of the universal in his non-fictive prose to keep it alive. Repeating, there is not much of the universal in his non-fictive prose to keep it alive, but one just wonders at the sheer number of his works, which total about 500. John Arbuthnot, 1667 to 1735. Arbuthnot, a man estimable for his learning, amiable for his life, and venerable for his piety, a close associate of Swift and Pope, and was by profession a physician. His History of John Bull, an allegorical satire, in the words of Leguioy, is a short history of English literature, remains one of the most famous political satires England has ever produced. Therein is described the legal battle between John Bull, England, and Nick Frog, Holland, on one side, and Louis Baboon, France, and Lord Strutt, Spain, on the other. Arbuthnot upholds evidently the Tory point of view, favouring the termination of hostilities then raging between the countries mentioned above. He manifests an easy mastery of lucid and vivid style, as also delightful strokes of irony, which made Swift complain, "Arbuthnot is no more my friend, he dares to irony pretend, which I was born to introduce, refined it first and shewed its use." Jonathan Swift, 1667 to 1745. Swift was the greatest prose satirist of England. He dominated the first half of the 18th century, as Dr. Johnson did the second, and as an intellectual he was far superior to Johnson. Some of his satires are obscene, misanthropic, and cynical, but none can question his moral integrity and the unflinching earnestness with which he removes the external of things to bring out the corruption which lies in their heart. Swift's satire is all-embracing. Its rapier-like thrusts spare neither a fraudulent almanac maker, nor a misguided zealot, nor an airy philosopher, nor a glib politician, nor a conceited fop, nor a pretentious scientist. This greatest of satirists once satirized even satire, the paltry partridge, an almanac maker, and the great Walpole, the Prime Minister, alike winced under the terrible whip of scorpions. End of page 161, now page 162. Now page 62. Swift's sensitiveness to all corruption, the numerous frustrations which punctuated the entire span of his life, and the egregious folly, egregious, egregious folly, corruption and self-seeking which he found tainting the age of reason and good sense, prompted him to take up his lash. The age deserved satire, and his personal disposition and disappointments made him keen enough to give it. Swift is perfectly right when he says in The Death of Dean Swift, "Perhaps I may allow the Dean had too much satire in his vein, and seemed determined not to starve it, because no age could more deserve it." The greatness of Swift's satire is, in the last analysis, a triumph of technique. His arsenal as a satirist is chock full of weapons of all description. Wit, raillery, sarcasm, irony, allegory, and so many more weapons are used to perfection by him in his crusade against folly, injustice, and unreason. Whichever weapon may be employing for attack, his satire is usually darker and more telling than that of most writers. He may sometimes touch lightly, but very often he pierces deep to the very heart of life. In any case, his satire is very disturbing, as it presents things in a fairly unconventional perspective, eminently calculated to shatter the complacency of the reader. When Swift points out the acquired follies, he is quite constructive, but when he satirizes the very nature of man, he is nothing but destructive. Of all the satiric techniques, the one most effectively used by Swift is irony. With Swift, irony is often much more than just a figure of speech. It is extended to that the entire range of thoughts and feelings presented in a satiric work seems to be coming not from Swift himself, but from a fictive character, persona, created for the purpose. This irony lies in the difference between the views expressed by the persona and the common sense views, the same as the views of Swift himself. Swift wrote a very large number of satires, of which the most important are the Battle of the Books, A Tale of a Tub, and Gulliver's Travels. The first is just a jeu d'esprit, and was meant to lampoon in mock heroic terms the opponents of his patron Sir William Temple, particularly Richard Bentley and William Wotton. Both of them had disputed the view of temple granting supremacy to the ancients over the moderns. A Tale of a Tub was meant to be a satire on the numerous and gross corruptions in religion, gross corruptions in religion and learning. It represented the Church of England as the best of all churches in doctrine and the principle, and all were lashed and also lashed the shallow writers and the critics of the age. Gulliver's Travels is the most famous of Swift's works. In it, he savagely indicated that animal called man, though it less has the externals of a travel romance, yet in reality it is a humble, it's terrible but. A Tale of a Tub was meant to be a satire on the numerous and gross corruptions in religion and learning. It represented the Church of England as the best of all churches in doctrine and discipline, and also lashed the shallow writers and critics of the age. Gulliver's Travels is the most famous of Swift's work. In it, he savagely indicated that animal called man, though it was the externals of a travel romance, yet in reality it is a terrible but well calculated satire on all the activities of human life and all the attributes of human nature, not sparing even the human body. However, its irony is so deep that it has been a favorite gift book for children. Kipling once said that Swift ignited a volcano to light a child to bed. In fact, the book is enjoyed by the children from 9 to 90. Dr. Johnson, 1709 to 1784. As a prose writer, Dr. Johnson is particularly known for the dictionary, his periodical papers, his philosophical tale, Rasselas, and his critical work, Lives of the Poets. He was the charm of the realm of letters in his age, and an accepted arbiter of taste. As a critic, he made many egregious errors, but his infectious sanity cannot be ignored. As a prose stylist, he was a purist. However, his style, though vigorous and direct, is somewhat heavy-handed, and as such is sometimes derisively called Johnsonese, which Chamber Dictionary defines as Johnsonian style, idiom, diction, or an imitation of its ponderous English, full of antitheses, balanced triads, and words of classical origin. Goldsmith said jokingly about Johnson's style that it may fit the mouths of whales, but it certainly does not fit the mouths of little fish. Edmund Burke, 1729 to 1797. Burke was the greatest orator of the age. He dealt with the pressing political problems facing the British Empire. His work concerning Indian and American affairs and the French Revolution are couched in brilliant and rhetorical prose, which cannot but impress the most indifferent reader or listener. He was an anti-theorist who recommended action in keeping with the spirit and complexion of the times. The periodical essay and the novel are the two important gifts of our excellent and indispensable 18th century to English literature. The latter was destined to have long and variegated career over the centuries, but the former was fated to be born with the 18th century and to die with it. End of page 162, now page 163. This shows how it was a true mirror of the age. A.R. Humphreys observes in this connection, if any literary form is the particular creation and the particular mirror of the Augustan age in England, it is the periodical essay. Generally speaking, it is very difficult to date precisely the appearance of a new literary genre. For example, nobody can say with perfect certainty as to when the first novel or the first comedy or the first short story came to be written in England or elsewhere. We often talk of fathers in literature. For instance, Fielding is called the father of English novel, Chaucer the father of English poetry, and so forth. But what is done more often than not in a loose and very impressive sense, the difficulty in dating a genre, however, does not arise in the few cases, that of the periodical essay included. The periodical essay was literally invented by Steele on April 12, 1709, the day he launched the Tatler, Tatler, Tatler. Before the Tatler, there had been periodicals and there had been essays, but there had been no periodical essays. The example of the Tatler was followed by a large number of writers of the 18th century till its very end, when with the change of sensibility, the periodical essay disappeared along with numerous other accompaniments of that age. Throughout the century, there was a deluge of periodical essays. The periodical essay remained the most popular, if not the most dominant literary form. Men as different as Pope, Swift, Dr. Johnson, and Goldsmith launched Goldsmith found the periodical essay an eligible medium. As a matter of fact, it was, unlike the novel, for example, the only literary form which was promised without exception by all the major writers of the century. It is hard to name a single first-rate writer of the century who did not write something for a periodical paper. Messrs. Jane H. Jack says, from the days of Queen Anne, who had the Spectator taken in with her breakfast, to the time of the French Revolution and even beyond. Periodical essays on the lines laid down by Steele and Addison flooded the country and met the eye in every bookseller's shop and coffee home. Before tracing the history of the periodical essay in the 18th century and assigning causes for its development popularity, let us consider what exactly is a periodical essay. What is a periodical essay? What is called a periodical essay was first of all given by Steele as the Tatler. Nothing of this type had before him been attempted in England or even elsewhere. However, to attempt a definition of the periodical essay is neither easy nor helpful. George Sherburne, in A Literary History of England, edited by Albert C. Borg, affers to this connection. Rigorous definition of this peculiarity, particularly English literature in 18th century type of publication, is not very helpful. Periodical essay thus has been aptly described as dealing with morals and manners, but it might in fact deal with anything that pleased its author. It covered usually not more than the two sides of the two columns of a folio half sheet. Normally it was shorter than that. It might be published independent of other material as well. The Spectator, except for advertising, or it might be leading article in a newspaper.